Hi, thanks for joining us again. Today's topic is about 3 myths about stretching. The first one I want to discuss with you guys is about the static stretching. Is it effective, and does it help us at all? So there are a lot of research out there, but one of the most recent one came into light a few years ago that came up back that it says that when athletes perform static stretches, they actually get weaker prior to performing a particular strength exercise or strength routine after doing some static stretches. Now, again, just like anything else, sometimes when research shows it in a test tube, it actually works out great. But for me, with us practicing, and I've been practicing for 18 years and been around sports all my life, stretching really is very effective to help to prevent against injuries, but also at the same time it does help to keep the mobility of your muscle, which to me helps a lot in enhancing how you function, not just strength. Oftentimes we worry about strength only, but stretching isn't about strength. Stretching is about overall functionality. So to me, that's one of the biggest myths about static stretches. You should do static stretches and also do dynamic stretches, but never totally throw out static stretches just because you're losing just a teeny bit of strength. Most of the time, the lack of strength that comes from static stretching is very, very minimal. Most people would never even realize how much strength that they're losing. The second myth is that when you stretch, that your muscle actually lengthens. Well, research has shown that actually your muscle doesn't really lengthen. It actually becomes more productive in stretching. Now, what do we mean by that is that imagine that if you have a particular piece of wood, right? And if you let this piece of wood dry out, what happens to it? It literally cracks when you bend it, okay? Now, when we stretch, what happens is that you're applying more functionality to the muscle or to the tendons and or ligaments. And what that does is, in a sense, that it brings nutrients and fluids into the soft tissue. So imagine that that piece of dry wood now has become very, very supple and has more fluids in it. So now it's the same piece of wood, but what it's going to do is that it's going to be able to bend better. So in a sense that the length does not increase, but its ability to bend better does increase. Now that leads us to the third myth, which is stretching does not prevent against injuries. That's one of my biggest pet peeves when people out there, particularly coaches and particularly trainers, they hear a lot of the research and then we all get confused, including me. Oftentimes I read a lot of this research and have to take a step back and say, what does that apply to my practice? Does that apply to my everyday routines that I do? And does it make sense? And again, it doesn't really make sense to me because why? Because again, it goes back to the example. If you have more pliability in that particular muscle, because when you're stretching, it brings fluids into that, it only makes sense that your ability to handle the stretch, the tension that puts upon it, would definitely limit the effects of injuries on that particular soft tissue. So in a sense, for me, it's so crucial that we do stretch because it does, in a sense, prevent against injuries in the long run. So thanks for joining us. Again, anytime you guys have any questions or any inputs or any subjects that you want us to talk over with you guys, please let us know. Thanks.